Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current. Hello, welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Conscious Quest, the podcast for seekers. I am one of your hosts, Sarah Parlow.
And I am Rishi Khatri.
Today, we are going to discuss the idea that midlife can sometimes feel like a desert. But what if I told you that there was a rainstorm coming, and with it brought the possibility of new life? We have an incredible return fan favorite guest today. Our episode of Conscious Quest, episode 2 with Dr. Sandra Cox, was the most listened to and downloaded episode we have had this far. So when we found out that she had a new project and some new ideas to share, we were so excited to have her back. Before we get to her, I'm going to just remind our listeners about her with a brief bio. And so Dr. Sandra Cox is a board certified psychiatrist, and she graduated from her residency at the University of Colorado in 1996. Since then, she's also lived in Montana, Utah, and Southern California. She loves places that draw her to the natural environment, and nature is her source of spiritual renewal, and she enjoys bringing others to this same sense of peace. Dr. Cox has also studied energetic healing, transpersonal psychology, nature-based spiritualities, and mythologies that pertain to the work of soul exploration. In a new retreat that we're going to talk about today, Dr. Cox weaves together nature, ceremony, creativity, dreamwork, and meditative practices, creating an immersive experience that guides participants into the realm of the soul or shadow. The shadow is where our deepest longings await discovery. C.G. Jung calls the shadow the hidden part of every psyche. We have a lot to discuss today. Welcome back, Dr. Sandra Cox.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm honored to be back and to be able to talk about this really important work.
We are definitely excited about it as well. I mean, how does it feel, first of all, to be a fan favorite? Everybody loved your episode.
I'm kind of speechless about that. That's not something I would ever expect.
Well,
but
you can count me in as one of the fans, and you are one of my favorites. That's for sure.
You two are my favorites as well.
So the listeners can also hear too is that whenever we have like a really tough case, I guess the experience and knowledge, we always try to get to Dr. Cox to talk to her about the folks in our program. And so, yeah, I have utmost respect for you, Dr. Cox.
Oh, thank you. And the same goes for both of you. I'm honored to work, Rishi, with Clear Mind Treatment. I'm very blessed to know you all.
So are we, believe me. The feeling is mutual.
Can we talk for a minute about how long you've known each other and your professional interaction, just to kind of create a basis?
Well, it's so funny. So I always forget how time flies. Time really does fly. And so it's been several years. It's been at least 4 years now.
Yes.
Because we started talking to Dr. Cox and we had a professional relationship, and we were introduced from a third party. And it was that was about 4 years ago when we were still in our Santa Monica location. But what was interesting about Dr. Cox is that I quickly realized that how much in alignment that her and I were in our own thoughts, how we looked at the world, and our own. I mean, I guess like our values as well, and even like our recreational activities, and these things are a respect for nature. She loves the mountains. I love the mountains as well, and so we connected. We've actually had, we spent with my cousin and her husband, and we actually went to Yosemite at one point about 2 years ago, which we need to repeat at some point really soon. It'll be really fun to go hang out again. But yeah, it's been a while.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you know each other because Dr. Cox, you're here today, and you have something called, am I saying this correct, Inanna retreats that you are launching very soon.
Yes.
And I think our listeners are really wanting to know what it's about and why it is personal to you. What inspired this?
Well, that is that's a question that requires a rather long answer, but I'll try to um, guide us from the start to the finish. But when I was in residency, um, I originally started out in OBGYN, and then I switched to psychiatry because I really felt like OBGYN was not as humane as I wanted to practice, and also didn't address the whole person. And I thought, well, I'll get closer to that with psychiatry. And so I went into residency in psychiatry. Um, and then I started to feel like there was something missing there too, um, something deeper. What we were being taught was biology and, of course, psychology, but psychology more from a sort of superficial level.
Mhm.
And I started studying Carl Jung on my own. My program didn't talk about Carl Jung except with a side eye. And so um, I started studying Carl Jung and reading Joseph Campbell
Mm,
and, realizing that there is so much more to the human psyche than just the brain, which is biology, and the mind, which is psychology. But there's
mhm.
something more that's deeper and much more mysterious. So, um, how I got to Inanna retreats goes even back farther than that, because as a child, my days were spent as often and as much as possible out in nature. I was
Mm,
sort of an only child. My father and mother were older when they had me. They had a boy who was much older than me. He's
mm,
15 years older than me. So he was out of the house basically by the time I was 3, and he became a doctor. And I was raised on a farm, and I spent a lot of time in nature.
yeah.
And I really strive to please my parents, which was kind of hard to do. Um, and my father could be quite difficult, to put it
Mm,
mildly. And so going out into nature on my pony or my horse, depending on how old I was,
Mhm.
offered me, a solace and a refuge
mm,
away from what could otherwise be, an unhappy place.
got it.
Um, and in my endeavors to endear myself to my father, I became much more like a little boy than a little girl. I was
Mhm,
always out on the
Mhm.
farm, mending fences and baling hay, cutting hay, fishing, doing things
Mhm.
that boys do, herding the cows for my dad, that sort of thing. And then I had this brother who had gone into medical school, and the whole
mhm,
family just revered him, thought he was just,
mm,
and he's pretty great. I don't have to say that, but I wanted to be like him. So when I grew up, I pursued a career in medicine. And as I got through this part of my training and residency and started studying Carl Jung, started studying Joseph Campbell, I decided that when I graduated from residency, I wanted to know more. So I went into energetic medicine and I studied 3 years of energetic medicine. I started to understand through the lens of the archetypes of Jungian psychology that allopathic or Western medicine is really a masculine way of approaching healing.
mm,
The
mhm.
masculine way being we put one foot in front of the other. We determine where we're going. We put one foot in front of the other to get there.
Yeah.
So it is a solution based, you know. Whereas energetic medicine
Mhm.
is really more in line with the feminine archetype. The
Mm,
feminine meaning in the moment of becoming,
yeah.
and that cycle of becoming, dying, and becoming again. Because energetic medicine requires the healer to be in the moment and accept what comes to them energetically
Mm,
from the person that they're working with, and then to
yeah.
allow intuition to guide what comes next. So there's no prescribed or proscribed method. So it was at that point that I started to understand I've lived my life without this feminine part of me. And I really want that, and I don't know how to go about it.
Okay.
So I began a search. And the search led me to an organization called Animas Valley Institute. And it was founded by Bill Plotkin, who is a depth psychologist. And I went to join them for some of their retreats, which really are they're for people who don't mind roughing it a bit. Like you're going to hike down into a canyon and be there for 8 days and nights with no running water, no amenities, a tarp to put over you, you know.
That's rough.
Very, very roughing it. Yeah, very, very much so. But through his methods, I began to discover more about myself.
Okay.
And I discovered the importance of being in nature and how nature really reflects back to us our wild self.
And you talk about that
So
wild self. And
that,
what does that mean exactly?
well, I think, some of the best ways I've heard it described, and I don't want to get the quotations wrong, so I've written them down. But the first one is by David Whyte. He is a poet. That is, if you don't know who David Whyte is, Whyte, you definitely need to read David Whyte. But he speaks of the wild self as that small, bright, and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart.
I love that.
In other words, it is the essence of who you are and who you were when you were born. Bill Plotkin calls it the vital, mysterious, and wild core of our individual selves, an essence unique to each person, qualities found in layers of the self much deeper than our personalities.
Well, so it's interesting. So I feel a lot of our folks, and the fact that you studied Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung as well. I mean, I think when you have multiple people and multiple very wise people touch on, a very similar point, because Joseph Campbell also talked about that as well. And Joseph Campbell for me is he changed me in such a way where just his words themselves and how, but he said, follow your bliss. So he called it the bliss that's in your self, and you follow it, and all of a sudden doors open up where there were only walls, and there'll be helping hands. And so this could be something similar where you find that ultra consciousness, or like your true authentic self inside.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. So I decided that, of course, I just finished residency. I had a ton of student loans to pay back. I pursued my career in psychiatry in order to do so. But something very magical happened on a journey that I took with Animas Valley Institute. And it's where, although I had done ceremony before, it's where I learned the power of ceremony. He had asked us to come.
I'm so sorry. Just to clarify, and there's new parlance, in SoCal, and so sometimes ceremony means ayahuasca.
Oh no, we're not talking about anything.
Okay.
No, nothing. If there's any mind altering that goes on, it's from a completely natural point of view.
Okay. So
it's because of the interface with nature and the depth that you're going into nature that you become altered, but not by taking a substance. So yes, thank you.
That's how I know about ceremony. That's how you and me think the same way. But like I've heard it so much. Yeah. We did the ceremony, and I'm like, oh, you mean ayahuasca? Okay.
and there's nothing wrong with pursuing it in that way, but I think many people can be unprepared for what they discover with that much of a powerful substance in their body. But for me, I Bill said, come and come prepared with your own ceremony, and you don't need to tell me what it is.
Mm.
I went, of course, with the idea that I'm going to integrate my feminine.
Mm.
So, having come to my understanding of the masculine nature of allopathic medicine and the feminine nature of energetic medicine, I took a copy of my medical diploma, and I took ribbons, each the color of a chakra, 7 ribbons. Now, it just so happened on this journey, and this is how soul and what some people call the universe set things up for you. There were 8 of us on this journey, and guess what? 4 men and 4 women.
Isn't that so perfect? Isn't it
So,
beautiful balance
isn't
already
it
from the
perfect?
get-go?
Yes, yes. Um, and in the ceremony, I I created sacred space in the way that I know in my tradition of spirituality. And then I rolled my diploma up, and I had each participant tie a ribbon around that diploma. And then I burned it and offered it to Mother Earth
Mm.
there, and asked that my soul help me to integrate my feminine nature. I was single at the time. I was also 42 years old, so it didn't seem to me that I was probably going to be having a family. And not that I don't love children, just want to be able to tend to them and not always be gone.
Yeah.
But a year later, quite unexpectedly, I found myself pregnant, and that beautiful child is now 20 years old. That the moral of that story is that when you bring a, an issue, a problem, or a question to your soul through ceremony, you need to be ready for the ground to move under your
Mm.
feet.
Mm. I like that a lot.
Yes.
Wow.
So we can see ceremony as
So
this
that's my story.
beautiful. And so ceremony for you is this sort of container through which alchemy sort of happens. You talked a lot about integration, and I feel that's a very universal human experience of integrating the different parts of ourselves, and
Mm-hmm.
balancing the masculine with the feminine, or the light with the shadow. And one thing that we tend to forget about is that even shadow has its purpose, and that was even in your
Yes.
bio a
Yes.
little. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people think of shadow as a place where only our limitations, or the negative parts of us that we don't want to recognize, resides. But shadow is also where the gold of our soul resides, because many times ego, which is what is developed, that overlays our unconscious mind, ego oftentimes doesn't feel large enough or capable enough to bring the gold to the surface and carry it to the world.
Hmm. So on some level, the shadow is our teacher.
Oh,
Absolutely.
oh goodness. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for those folks who are born like feet away from home base, and
Hmm.
they didn't have to round first, second, third, how it's a lot for them to learn when things just don't go their way because everything has been given to them. And so shadow, especially for those folks, I talk to our folks who come to us, and you guys probably talk to your folks as well. Is that again, it can be a teacher, and you can learn. All this is a
Mhm.
good big learning experience. And what do you want to learn, from it? You can have it hurt you, the shadow, or you can have it teach you. I love that.
Yeah. Who's in control, so to speak.
Well, right, right. And oftentimes we're unaware of the gold in our shadows because um, we come into this world already containing our wild self, that unique part of us that is more than just personality. It comes in like the foundation on which the rest of our lives will be built. But pretty soon, the first set of architects comes in, and that is family of origin.
Yeah.
Some people call it the tribe you're born into, and they have a design that they want to build, and they get busy starting to build that first level of your life, and that overlays the foundation and obscures the foundation. It's what they expect you to be. It's who they tell you you are. And as that gets set in place, then the next set of architects comes in, and perhaps that are the teachers, the institutions where we find ourselves learning, and then we're told again who we are and what we can and can't do. And that then obscures even more the foundation. And then there's another layer that comes in as we graduate from our learning institutions and become spouses, parents. We go into a career. There are these other architects that are coming in, and they're adding these stories, story upon story, on our foundation of our lives. And as midlife comes around, and maybe we've spent our lives until that point, our adult lives until that point, raising kids, being in a career, being married, and maybe the kids go, maybe they're leaving home. If we don't have children, we wake up and look around and say, okay, I've mastered my career.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? Or we look at the person sitting across the breakfast table with us in the mornings and say, kind of tired of looking at you, or something like that. And suddenly we're kind of looking out the window of that top story, wondering, what is all this built on? Who am I really? And that's when in midlife, when all of it can come crumbling down.
I love how you liken this period of midlife to the desert. And then you also talk about the possibility that comes with that. And if you'd like to
Yes.
explore that a little bit, I think our listeners would love to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah. Well, this first retreat that we're holding in April is for women in midlife, because I think women in particular have lived lives that are usually a lot different
Mm-hmm.
than men, in that they have centered their lives around caring for other people. And that's how they've been socialized throughout their lives, to care for other people. And when midlife comes along, the value of a woman often wanes in the eyes of society.
Mm-hmm.
Her value as a sexual being,
Right.
her value for her beauty, her value for her caretaking, it all kind of starts to fall away. And I think a woman in that stage of life, regardless of whether or not she's been a mother, um, or a wife or what, but she can start to feel kind of barren,
Mm-hmm.
kind of desolate, like a desert.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if many of the listeners have ever been to the desert here in California after the rains or during the rains in the springtime. The desert comes alive and starts to bloom. And so I see this process of approaching midlife, feeling desolate, and then knowing that there's a rainstorm, seeing it coming on the horizon. That kind of looks scary.
Mm.
But once the rainstorm is washing over us, then we see the desert start to bloom, and we see the life that is there available to be lived. So that's why we're taking us out into the desert in April, at the time of the bloom.
How poetic and
Wow,
how
that is a
incredible.
wonderful, wonderful analogy. Absolutely. I saw this one, reminds me of a picture I saw. I somehow, like, Facebook has figured out I like space stuff and inspirational sayings and these type of things. So I get these pop-ups, and one I saw recently actually was one where it had a picture of a desert and a picture of a lawn and like a parking lot. It was like of a cityscape, and she goes, which one is the desert? And it was the one underneath. It was a cityscape, because if you and the picture showed the desert itself had so many animals, and they all adapted to have, like, just teeming with wildlife.
Yes.
And if you look at the city, where they're supposed, what we think is life, it's a dead lawn. Like, what's living in a lawn? What's living in a parking lot? What's the real desert? Here. And so what the point of that is that what we see as a desert, in our eyes, is actually teeming with so much more, but we just have to be able to see it.
So it's
That's a
all
great analogy, Dr.
perspective.
Cox.
Yeah.
Mm.
Dr. Cox, I love how you pointed out the unique circumstances around women in midlife. I wonder if you, or maybe Rishi too, could also talk about like what it's like for men in midlife. What are those specific needs and journeys that they're confronting?
Well, I can't really say too much, because in my mind, I'm still, not in midlife in any way, shape, or form.
Rishi is forever young. Let's just say that.
He really is.
I can talk about my parents, though, and I can talk about, how they go through. And yes, it's similar. I think that, we get to a point in life where our value, I think, maybe it's age, or perhaps it's maybe perception, but I think that when we pin our value on our external eyes, or our bodies, or what we're doing, for other people, and we pin our identity on that, and we would no longer do that, that's like when the crisis happens for people. And I think that when, especially for men, certainly their jobs are their identity, and when they stop working, one of the things that they warn retirees about is that you're going to go down. You better have a plan, for your retirement, because otherwise you're going to have a steep decline. And I think that's part of the identification with the external, and what people, and the perceived, and that's like where we have to now, perhaps just identify with the authentic self, not with the avatar.
Right. And so it's,
Absolutely. I take care of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say it sounds to me like taking ownership of your inner world. You were going to add something, Dr. Cox?
No, I was just going to echo what Rishi said, is that, I frequently find folks, men in my office, who are in a deep state of depression after retirement, or worse, perhaps having been injured on a job that's a manual labor job, and not being able to do what they've identified with all of their adult lives. And it really is a crisis. So coming to coming to this in a more conscious way, rather than just sort of being blindsided with midlife, or what, and I think I think these days, since 60 is the new 40, it's my motto. um, um, it can be even later in life. We can think of that as midlife, because people are staying younger and healthier longer. But coming to that stage in a more conscious way, in a more prepared way, understanding that there's more to my life than what I've just been living, which is basically what everyone else has told me I have to be or live. And there are ways to reinvent myself, that my deeper levels of creativity and the wild part of myself calls me to it, if I listen hard enough, if I take the steps to be able to, in other words, get away from the day world what Bill Plotkin calls the day world. Um, get in yourself into a space where you're unplugged from your technology, and it's you and nature and the work that you need to do in order to prepare for this stage of life. And because the next stage of life can be so fulfilling. I remember when I was in undergrad, and my brother was telling me about one of his favorite professors, biochemistry professor in medical school. I hadn't met her yet because I hadn't yet entered medical school. She went back to school at the age of 55 when her husband died, and she obtained a doctorate degree in biochemistry, and she was now on faculty at the School of Medicine, and well into her mid to late 60s by the time I met her, just full of life, just enjoying every day. And I thought, I had started to school late in life as well, not as late as her, but I thought, my God, if she can do it, I can too. It's never too late to reinvent who you are if you stop and listen to what's calling you.
It reminds me of something my dad told me, like when I was considering going back to school myself at the ripe old age of 29. I was asking everyone, am I too late? Am I too old to do this? Am I too old? And just asking people. And then my dad goes, in 5 years, you're going to be that same age, so you might as well just do what you want. And in 5 years, otherwise you would have lost that opportunity. Just do it, and you'll get there one way or another, either having completed a new education or not. So what would you rather have? And I'm like, well, I'm saying it like that makes perfect sense.
It is a journey to have that courage to move closer towards that wild self of ours. And Dr. Cox, you brought up a few modalities that you use, things like nature and ceremony in your retreats. And so I'm just wondering about what other modalities can really help listeners find that wild, authentic self.
Well, one of my favorite things is dreamwork. And dreamwork can take many different forms depending on who's doing it and what their training is. I don't really have any training per se. And well, I mean, I do. The James Hilliard approach. James Hilliard is also a depth psychologist who's written some weighty books. I say weighty because I frequently, when I'm reading James Hilliard, I have to throw his book against the wall. But it's just it's so dense. But
I can imagine.
The way of working dreams in the Jungian perspective is that everyone and everything in the dream is a part of you. And it is to be approached by the dreamer, and someone can facilitate that through the lens of symbology. So dream work is and dreams oftentimes on these kind of journeys, these kind of retreats, become very powerful. So each morning the group will gather to share dreams and to work maybe one or two dreams before the day gets started. So that's one thing that we do. Another thing that we do is creative expression. For different people, that means different things. That might mean sketching or painting or writing something creatively, or song, dance, something that expresses what they're learning about themselves. And then we also do a kind of like sort of group ceremony. It sounds very woo-woo and very oh hi, so to speak. But we do drumming circles, to enhance trance work, together, because, and that's done in silence, except for the drums. May involve movement as well as the drumming, but there's often expression that comes out of that, that rhythmic, trance-inducing exercise that opens gates, opens sort of portals in our psyche to allow us to see something more about our connection to the world. And then also, of course, sitting in council, which is something that is not done very often anymore, but it is a non-violent way of communicating and was developed. I who knows who developed it? I mean, it's an ancient indigenous way of communicating in a group of people. And oftentimes indigenous cultures would have something called a talking stick, where the person that holds the talking stick has the floor, so to speak. And the rule is to speak from your heart. And then the rule for everyone else in the council is to listen with their heart open, which means dropping defenses, which means taking care of themselves emotionally as they hear what this other person has to say. And actually, that form of communication can be taken into any arena, including the corporate arena. It would do well to be taken into the corporate arena and even into the family arena and marriages, where the listening and the talking is from the heart without defenses.
I love the idea of the talking.
So that's the gist of it.
Yeah. Rishi,
Yes.
do you want the
Yeah,
talking?
I think especially the corporate. I'll just keep on interrupting like the way I am. So I'll do the interrupting stick. Is there something like that?
The interrupting stick. And I'm going to go,
it in, like...
give it back to me. Come here.
You were saying though, Rishi, I was just teasing you.
Oh no, I was just going to quip on corporate. Like, it would behoove our politicians and our nation to have like a national talking stick. Goodness, that would change everything for us instead of what we have now. But anyway, I was going to talk more about that. But...
Yes.
Right, and
let's not get into politics.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So in regards to the modalities, I know, Sarah, you have a couple more questions, but just to reiterate, so part of the retreat, and how long is your retreat for?
We usually try to do it for about 5 days. Sometimes longer, depending on kind of where we're going to be and, what my availability is. But I think 5 days is a good amount of time because it gives you a long enough period of time to sort of get immersed and get away from the day world. And that's one of the rules in the retreat is that when you sort of symbolically or maybe even we create a threshold, when you step over that threshold into the group, you are entering the realm of soul. And there will be no talk during the time that we're in the retreat of the day world. So there won't be talk about sort of the small talk, the political talk, or the office room talk, or whatever. It's going to be about soul and why you're there.
You may want to just confiscate everyone's phone and have like a residential treatment facility where they can only look at it once a day at the end or something.
That is one of the rules, that you do have designated phone time. Otherwise, you don't have it on you.
I need to have that, actually. That'd be really nice.
The first time I went on one of these journeys with Animas Valley Institute, picture it. It was 10 days after 9/11.
Wow.
And we gathered we gathered in Durango, Colorado. I had no idea who these people were. Didn't know. Knew why it was coming. Was surprised to see 4 men and 4 women. First clue that there was something big going to happen there. And we drove out into the desert of southeast Utah, and we hiked down into a canyon for 8 days and 8 nights. We were completely out of touch. And we didn't know if we were going to have a civilization to come back to, because who knows what's going on out there. I think it was along about the 7th day we saw a plane go over. And we're like, oh, okay, The world still exists out there.
Still a world out there. Amazing. That was your
It's still a world out
contribution.
there. Yes, yes.
Dr. Cox, can we talk about the challenging part of any growth experience is really integrating it into what you call day life? And I believe you have some support in place in your retreat to help people with that component. Can you share a little bit about that for our listeners?
Yes, yes. I think that that's a very important thing because people often come out of these sort of experiences feeling almost stripped bare.
Mm,
Um, that's I could digress into the story of Inanna, but that's why I call it Inanna. And we can talk about that a little bit in a minute. But you come out of it feeling raw
mm,
many times. Not that that's a bad thing, because rawness can also be indicate, okay, new life, new growth is happening, new healing is happening over that raw spot. And you can decide what it's going to be. But support is needed because you're going to go back to your day world. You're going to go back perhaps to your job, to your marriage, or whatever the situation is that you live in. And you'll need to figure out, okay, how do I proceed? I learned all of these things about myself and my world. And I have this idea of the direction I want to go. And how do I do that? How does it not just get lost?
mhm.
In the Maya of the day world. And so what we do is we set up for the first month, and it's completely voluntary. People don't have to do this, but it's recommended that for the first month we do a weekly sort of group Zoom meeting where participants are able to share what perhaps their challenges are, what they've discovered since they've come back, get some guidance about how to move forward and how to work through um, the things that are coming up for them as they discover who they are now back in this day world. So we'll do the initial month is a weekly call. The month after that will be twice. And then there will be also individual sessions available. And these are to be considered. I want to encourage people in my little disclaimer because I am a psychiatrist. This
Yeah.
is not psychotherapy. This is not psychiatric treatment. This is strictly more, although I abhor the word, more like coaching, if you
Okay.
will. It's guidance. It's guidance. Yeah.
And support. And it sounds like
And support.
this might be just as critical a part as the actual journey because that is really the challenge is integration into our daily life.
Yes. Yes. We want people set up for success so that they don't come back and then run into roadblocks or what look like roadblocks and think, well, this was all for naught. I'm a failure. We want them to know that there is a way to start integrating this part of you into your lived life now.
And are there any specific tools that have personally helped you weather some of the changes of life or anything you could recommend to people listening? And do those tools change over time?
Well, they do, and I think it depends on what you might be dealing with at the moment. For me, it's always reconnecting with nature. My daily life doesn't allow me to do much of that, except when I walk my dogs in the morning and the evening. But there is nature there for me to connect to, even if you're in, downtown LA. There is still nature above you in the sky. There's nature in the people around you. You can find it wherever you go. And just being mindful of that, bringing yourself into the moment and appreciating the beauty in the moment and what is it saying to you about you at that time. So that's one way. Walks on the beach. We're so lucky here in California. Most of us can get to the beach pretty easily. And so walks on the beach are, yes, so vital. Um, and connecting with our animals, if we have animals, connecting with our family and friends if we have them, because that connection is so important. And again, reflects back to us, a part of ourselves. Our animals are really good at that,
Yeah.
So, and staying positive. There's a lot of focus on, I think maybe too much focus on positivity, and it can become sort of what we call toxic positivity. Like you have to be positive no matter what. There is a space and a place for grief in your life. But there's always, is if you see that grief as that rainstorm, there's always that bloom that comes afterwards, because it has something to show you. So staying in the moment, remembering what you have to be grateful for, whether it's just the flippin' chair you have to sit on, there's something to be grateful for. Bringing yourself back into that.
Sounds like some sage advice. Rishi, you get
Well, I
into
hope I've
nature.
learned something in all these years.
More than something.
Well, I mean,
Take the talking stick.
Yeah, Rishi, take the talking stick.
well, yeah, I mean, I could always take the talking stick. I love to listen. That's part of like I have two intentions this year, or New Year's resolutions. One is to drink more water, which I think sounds so funny, but I love, like, that's something I want to do, and also to listen more this year. And so I'm like, I want to talk. I'm like, as a lawyer, I can always talk. I can always talk about whatever. It doesn't have to be anything. But like, in terms of nature, I think for me, nature is an absolute. It's a must. I think about, I lived in New York for some time, and I always think about, I got to get back to New York. I got to get back to New York. And then, gosh, like after living in SoCal, it's just, there's too much here. Like the size of these mountains here,
Amazing.
the ocean, the depth of the ocean, and the richness of the sunsets, and the desert so close by. I can't give it up, and I realize like how much that is important for me, because it really puts me in my place, and it makes me feel, that we're part of something bigger than just what we have created as a civilization. Our civilization, yes, it's mighty. It is the mightiest civilization that the earth has ever seen. But in 5 million years, when the cities have crumbled and gone back to dust, guess what's going to be there? The animals will be there, the ocean, the sky, the bounty that is Earth. It will still be there, and we've gone back to that place. So anyway, that's how I feel about it.
Well, I have just a little story to tell you,
Please.
if that's okay, about the reflection of nature. When I journeyed down into that canyon with Bill guiding us, he said, the first day he said, okay, everybody, after breakfast, split up and go your separate ways. And your assignment is to stalk an animal. Well, okay, stalk an animal. What is that? Where's that going to lead me? So I take off, upstream. It's a dry canyon, so I'm walking upstream down the middle of the canyon, with my journal, and I'm thinking in my head, oh, maybe I could stalk up, a mountain lion, or what am I going to find? And this little lizard runs out in the middle of the trail and turns and looks at me and sticks his tongue out. And I said, oh no, it's not you. You're too small. It's not you. And he kind of like stuck his tongue out again and started running like ahead of me, like guiding me. So I'm walking along, and pretty soon he stops, he turns, and I'm calling him he. I don't know, it could have been a female lizard, but turned, looked at me, stuck its tongue out, and I felt like it said to me, wait here. Ran off into the bushes. And I stood there and I waited, and I thought, should I wait? So I waited. Pretty soon came back, had a big bug in its mouth, gulped it down, stuck its tongue out at me, and then proceeded the same direction in front of me. I kept following this lizard, And it kept doing the same thing. Now, Bill had told us, when you hear my drum, that's when you turn around and come back to camp. Heard his drum. The lizard stopped, turned around, looked at me, stuck his tongue out, and went right back the other direction through my feet from where we had come. Turned around. Okay, so I went back, and we got back to the point I'm pretty sure just about the point where I met the lizard to begin with. It stopped, turned, stuck his tongue out at me, went off into the bushes, and did not come back. So what was my lesson there? For one thing, your ego's getting in the way. For another thing, if you stop and look at the small things, there's so much to learn, and they have so much to tell you. Don't underestimate the little things in life. So.
That sounds like a great call to action, Dr. Cox. Number 1, nature walks, get into nature. And number 2, listen to what it's trying to tell you.
Yeah, number 3, like for me, like I talk about these massive things on massive scales, right? I don't know if you noticed that, like these massive mountains and these massive sky and these things. But what you just reminded me of is that there's little things, like there's massive lessons to learn in little things. You don't have to have huge Santa Monica mountains to roam around in. You can see it in your backyard, right, in the middle of where you in the city too.
Yes. So I just want to encourage everybody to go to my website, www.inanna retreats, INANNA retreats.com, and schedule a call with me, and we'll take you on a journey.
I also want to say that you're on Instagram as well, Dr. Cox. Your handle for Inanna Retreats is at Inanna Retreats.
It's Inanna_retreats.
Fantastic. So everyone, I hope that you had some great takeaways from our time here today with Dr. Sandra Cox. Please check her out. Look into getting back into nature, and good luck on your own journeys through midlife or whatever period of transition you are going through. Any last thoughts from either of you?
We will be doing retreats that have different themes in the future also, in addition to our midlife retreat. One that I have planned for the probably in the fall is creating connection in a time of isolation.
I love that. Maybe what another one you could develop is a quarter life retreat for those people who've come out of adolescence, and out of school, and all of a sudden they're facing adulthood and like, where am I? What is this whole thing?
Right. In lieu of an actual rite of passage that our society is woefully missing for people coming out of that time.
Great idea and a good topic for another podcast. But in the meantime, Dr. Cox, thank you again for being here. And tune in next time. We have some great content ahead. And for everyone out there, stay conscious.